Really in any relationship, but we've been really focusing in on this one particular other, relationship, the one relationship. And last week we learned, boy, to stay in love, boy, don't compete with each other. We learned that one of the games that many couples play is let's count how many faults the other person has. Can't we? We can look at their life and we can recite them, can't we? We study their life, we watch them. Especially even in our friends, we can tell you every fault that they have when we play this game. And so we play the game, let's count how many faults the other person has. And another game that's played is, let's see how I can use the other person's faults against them. And we do that. And still another one is, let's keep track of their failures. Or there's some who actually take notes. There was one pastor friend of mine who had a guy in his congregation every week would hand him a list of 10 things he did wrong every Sunday. Can you imagine that? And could you imagine doing that to your spouse? Well, honey, here's 10 things wrong you did this week. Would you please straighten up and get those right? And then your spouse will turn around and hand you 20 things. And you come back and hand them 30 things. And the game keeps going, and we keep going, and we keep going, and it never ends. And as we learned last week, everyone loses. And another thing we learned last week is think of the other person as better than yourself. The goal in any relationship is not to win at those games I just talked about. Those games we play, but to let the other person always win. Let the other person always win on purpose. What? Guys, I'm telling you, it works. Ladies, I'm telling you, it works. Let the other person win on purpose. What? That's totally against our grain, isn't it? To let them win? There's rumor that the Broncos let the Seahawks win. Did you know that, Jamie? You told me that this morning. There's rumor that happened. Really? Come on now. Another thing we learned, and to understand, and the second thing is to understand the other person has more value than you. You respect them. You take interest in what they are interested in. Next thing, to staying in love is think how important the other person is in the relationship. In any relationship, we think we are the most valuable person to it, don't we? We think we're the most valuable, the MVP of this relationship. I am it. Oh, we might not say the words, but we can feel it. And our body language gives it away. And and other things give it away. We think we are the MVP of the relationship, when really the other person is the MVP. And like we learned from last week, we looked at what Jesus did for us. In Philippians 2, he gave up the need to be right. Did you know he did that? He gave up the need to be right, even though he was the truth. He gave up the need to be right. Instead, he did the right thing. He gave himself on the cross for us. And what we took from that is a relationship is not a competition of who's right and who's wrong. You're both on the same team. Jesus, we learn from Jesus, he willingly humbled himself. Jesus made the decision to humble himself, and the same is true in our relationship with others. It's a willful decision to humble, to submit, and subordinate ourselves to them. In other words, letting them win on purpose. Can you imagine what a relationship would look like if we would just let the other person win all the time, on purpose? Not to get back at them, but genuinely, just to let them win. Hey, you know what? You're right. And they'll say, no, you're right. Then you'll say, no, you're right. You're right. And it never ends. They're always right. The last thing he did, he willingly died. He gave up himself to demonstrate what it really means to love others or love another person. And I ask the question, what do we need to die to in order to demonstrate that we love the other persons? Moms and dads do this all the time with their kids, and moms and dads need to do this for each other as well. The scripture that Jared read this morning comes from 1 Corinthians 13. It's called, commonly known as the love chapter. And the whole focus is on, loving, how to love, ways to love. And love is very powerful. And it is powerful because God invented it. Did you know that? Despite what your countless books that you might read, it's really simple, and it works for me in my simple mind. It is powerful because God invented it. You didn't invent it. God invented love. Love softens people's hearts towards God, and it softens our hearts towards others. Love, though you're an older crowd will know this, love is a many-splendored what? Thing. Love is a many-splendored thing because it's ineffable. It can't be described, as we say. And I told you a couple of weeks ago that the number one reason, people give me for wanting to get married was because why? They want to what? They are what? In love. In reality, we learned, we are Twitter-pated. Those of you that don't watch Disney movies, shame on you. They will teach you about life. If you just watch it, they'll teach you all kinds of things about life. But what Twitter-pated is a form of eros love, and we get the word erotic from this word. Eros is the kind that makes you weak in the knees, makes you turn to second look, and we all have we all have erotic feelings for others, or hopefully just one other. If it's multiple, well, that's another sermon. So it's called adultery, fornication, and we'll get into that. It makes you say, this erotic love makes you say unreasonable things. Like, if you marry me, I will clean the bathrooms for the rest of our lives, It gets you in trouble. It does. And that same kind of love, when you say it, it's also the same kind of word when you say, I love green beans. That's erotic love. You just love green beans. Not that you're going to have a relationship with green beans. If you do, you are weird. All right? If you have a relationship with your card, you are weird. It's that erotic kind of love. It's that love that draws us to one another. So then, we doing that, it usually happens during dating and engagement, and boy, you're attracted to one another, and when things are going good, and you overlook their faults, and they're just the number one person, they can do nothing wrong, and then you say, man, I want to get married. Then you get married. Isn't it amazing? Then conflict arises. It's not a matter of if conflict arises. It is a matter of when conflicts arise. And suddenly that Twitter passion stops, or as we term it, the honeymoon ends. And there's a reason why conflicts arise in this. And, I was going to steal Andy Stanley's illustration of why conflicts arises in us, but, he does it better. I'll let him.
Mr. and Mrs. Mugg met right after college, and like many people, when they, he saw her and said, I got, and she's like, woo, and he had a degree and a future, and she was, look at her. I mean, she's a knockout, so that's working for her. And so they started dating, and when they first started dating and hanging out, they were so careful. Because he's trying to win her heart, and she's trying to win his affection, and they were just so careful. And they had a few little problems along the way, and there were a couple of bumps in the relationship, but they were just so careful, and everything was going to be great. And then they got married. And then about a month into their marriage, they had a problem. They had a bump. and stuff came out. And he looked at her and said, "Whoa, where did all that come from?" And she looked at him and said, "Well, I didn't know you had anger issues." And he said, "Well, I didn't have anger issues till you bumped me." Oh, there it is again. And then they had another problem, and they just were so, and she went to see her sister, and she said, "I didn't know he was like that." And he went to see, we don't know where guys go. They don't go anywhere, He looked in the mirror, perhaps, I don't know. And he sat around thinking, wow, she makes me so mad. She makes me so mad. Whenever she brings that up, I just get mad. And if she would quit bumping me like that, then I wouldn't be so mad. My wife, she has issues. And so he says to her, when we were dating, I didn't see all this. Where's all that coming from? She says, well, every time we get in an argument, you make me act that way. Now, it's been entertaining so far, even if you haven't learned anything, right? Now, here's what I want you to see. Mr. Mugg thinks the reason the blue beads come out of him is because they keep having conflicts and she keeps bumping him. And Mrs. Mugg thinks the pink beads keep coming out of her because he keeps, they keep having problems and he keeps bumping her. But here's the truth. The reason blue beads come out of Mr. Mugg is because that's what's in there. And the reason the pink beads come out of, you writing this down? The reason the pink beads come out of Mrs. Mugg is because that's what's in there.
When we enter into a relationship, all of us, we take our stuff with us into our relationship. And when stuff happens, conflict happens, disappointment happens, that stuff that is inside of us comes flying out. Those of you who've been married a while, is that not true? Those of you who've been through some rough stuff, is that not true? Yeah, that's true. All that stuff starts to come out. We said, man, I didn't know that was in you. I didn't know that was in you. And we begin to see it. And that's what happens in a relationship. Boy, all the stuff, everything that you experienced growing up as a kid, child, and a teen, and a young adult, and all of those things, those defining moments in your life, all of those things come to surface the moment a conflict arises. And we say, boy, I can't believe they're like that. Isn't that amazing though? But when we were dating and when we were engaged, we just kind of pushed it off to the side because you know what? We're there. We're Twitter-pated, we don't want to lose them. But all that stuff comes flying out of us. And, some of us have gone through more stuff than we've cared to growing up. And, and our moms and our dads and our step-parents did the best they could with the knowledge they had. And well, hate to say this, but we got our stuff from them. All of us in here have had defining moments, and not all of them have been good. And we've had defining moments in our lives that have shaped the way we have learned how to love. Do you know that? You have moments in your life that have defined how you love and how you love another person. And when you enter into a relationship, stuff happens. And what's inside of you comes out in the relationship. And it comes out of the relationships that are the most important to you. All right? Why? Because you love them. But what's inside of you comes out. Usually, most often, from those who are the most important to you. And, isn't it funny how that works, though? Cain killed Abel. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed Adam. Parents hurt their kids. Kids hurt their parents. Husband hurts their wives. Wives hurt their parents. And it keeps going and it keeps going. You would notice that this has been the trend since sin entered the world. We hurt those closest to us the most. And I believe, and I've asked these questions. I ask these questions all the time. To stay in love, we need to ask these questions. What's inside of me that needs to die? Because I guarantee you, if you go to the next person, that same stuff's going to come out. Doesn't make a difference who the person is. The same stuff is going to come out. When conflict arises, disappointment, the same stuff is going to come out. So it doesn't make a difference who you're with. The question is, what needs to die inside of me? And the second question I ask all the time, let me find it. Where do I need to grow up? Where do I need to grow up? You know, we always point to the other person, man. They just need to grow up and get over it, right? Isn't that what we say? Oh, man, they just need to get over it. You know, she needs to stop going to her sisters, you know. And we point, again, we play the game. We keep track. We write them down. We don't write them down physically. We mentally write the things down in our head, and we keep, you know, we keep remember them, and we build this wall, and stuff happens, and everything, all hell breaks loose in our homes, and, you know, we wonder why it happened. Hell in a good sense, not in a derogatory, bad word sense. Okay? I don't want you to think I cuss from the pulpit, so. Although I just did, didn't I? All right, I better move on. But where do I need to grow up? Yeah, and well, I married this one couple a number of years ago, and it was both their second marriages, and they both had been hurt pretty bad in their first marriages. And I asked them repeatedly when we met, "Are you sure you want to get married again?" And I kept asking. And the story that they shared with me, you know, how they met, you know, it was a storybook romance. It was things you could write a book about. And it was kind of sickening to counsel them. It really was, because, they wouldn't stop staring at each other. I'm like, would you look this way? Every time we met, they wouldn't stop looking at each other. But then they got married. Stuff happened. Conflict happened. Disappointment happened. A disaster happened. They had emotional meltdown. Hurt happened. And things happened in their marriage. And to put an ending to the story, they don't stare at each other anymore. Neither one of them wanted to grow up. Neither one of them wanted to change. Neither one of them was willing to die to anything. And what I've learned in life, if you watch Disney enough, like I do growing up, we all want this happily ever after, don't we? I know I do. We like stories that have a happily ever after ending. And just so you know, ladies, guys, what the happily ever after to, they'll just never tell you. That was free. And if you watch any movie or read any story, the happily ever after only comes after they've been through conflict, and after they've been through disappointment, and after they have gone through some pain and frustration. Then they made love happen. But they had to go through all of that stuff. We're like, but happily ever after does happen. And the other happily ever after is possible, but you need to watch the whole movie, or you must read the whole story to the end. Don't just stop in the middle of the pain and the conflict, because then you will never see the happily ever after. Right? We will never see it if we stop the story in the middle of the chapter, or if we never finish the book, or we leave the movie. And the same is true in life. Boy, if we leave the chapter, the happily ever after is not going to happen. Because we're too afraid sometimes to say, we're too afraid to let them win. We're too afraid that they're going to control our lives. We're so afraid. And all of those things, all those insecurities come up inside of us. All those things, and the defining moments in our childhood and teen and young adult all come up inside of us, and we don't know what to do with them. And then when somebody comes, boom, the conflict arises, everything comes out. All the hate, all the anger, all the frustration, everything, and it comes out loud. We think the louder we speak, the better they're going to hear, right? You ever talk to a foreign person who speaks a different language? It doesn't make a difference how loud you talk. They're not going to understand you. You can even talk really slow. And they have no idea what slow means. But the same is true, in any relationship. You can yell, scream, pout, do whatever you want. It's not doing any good. It's not communicating anything other than you're a selfish little brat. That's what your spouse thinks. That happily ever after are the code words for staying in love, And folks, Walt Disney didn't create the happily ever after. Walt Disney didn't create the happily ever after. God created the happily ever after. Have you read the story? It's a good ending. And those who follow Christ will get the happily ever after. But happily ever after are the code words for staying in love. And as he tells us, as Jared read in 1 Corinthians 13, he tells us here how to have the happily ever after. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wrong. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. And jump to verse 11. Paul says, when I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned like a child, reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now, if you look at that verse and you've read it closely and you look at it closely, because we are right now, none of those words are feelings or emotions. They are what love looks like. All of those words are action words. If you want the happily ever after, you want to stay in love, it just doesn't happen. Ladies, if you want a happily ever after, ladies, love your man like that. Men, if you want a happily ever after, love your woman like that. If you want to stay in love, repeat the cycle for the next 60 plus years. But Pastor, is it possible to love anyone that way? It's just impossible. I've tried. I failed. I can't do it. Yep, you're right. You can't. It is humanly impossible to love anyone that way. You see, because love was invented by who? God, not you. Love was invented by God. We don't naturally know how to love another person. Love is not a natural thing. It's something that needs to be learned. It's like starting anything new. When you start a new job, you need to be taught. When you start to play a sport, you need to be taught. When you start a new business, you need to be taught. And the same is true with learning how to love. We know how to fall in love, but we don't naturally know how to love anyone. I needed to learn how to love my wife. I needed to learn how to love each of my kids. It's a learning process. And if you want to stay in love, and if you want the happily ever after, learn how to love. Well, how do you do that? Well, it's not rocket science. You practice not being rude. You practice not being impatient. You practice being kind. You practice not having your own way. You practice not being irritable. You practice not keeping record of wrongs. You practice rejoicing in the truth. You practice never giving up. You practice enduring. You practice never losing faith and always being helpful. You practice that. And before any team goes on to a field, or any person's, you're practicing all the time. Because what? You got to learn how to do it. And you got to learn how to do it like your coach says. Or else you sit the bench, right? The same is true in anything. I need to stop and be honest with you. I thought, and I was taught as a teen and a young adult that God must be at the center of your relationship with the other person. I was taught that, heard it, it was drilled into me, and that's a lie. Did you know that? That is a lie. I have learned that it's impossible for God to be at the center of a relationship if he's first not at the center of your life. Do you get what I'm saying there? I heard, all these things that were teaching me, as a kid and as a young adult, and, God's got to be at the center of your relationship. Those are really, really, really good words, and I know they meant well, but then I learned that that's not true. Nowhere in the scriptures does he say he has to be at the center of your relationship. Show it to me. He does say he needs to be at the center of your life. Do you hear that? Because when he's at the center of your life, you will learn how to love. Conflicts and disappointments and all those things are going to come in any relationship. And I thought God was at the center of my life when I got married. And I learned through conflicts and disappointments and arguments that he wasn't at the center of my life. And folks, I'm taking ownership. Because of me, he wasn't at the center of our marriage. Guys, do you hear that? Take note, guys. Please take note. Please take responsibility and letting God be at the center of your life. That's the most important thing you can do in life. But because of me, he wasn't at the center of our marriage. And when it came to loving my spouse, I was just a child who spoke like a child, reasoned like a child, and many times acted like a child and refused to give up my childish ways. We like to keep our childish ways, don't we? Because that's where we feel comfortable. Boy, it's difficult giving up our childish ways and growing up. Growing up is painful, but you know what? We've got to grow up in loving other people, especially the other special person, anybody especially, but we need to grow up and give up our childish ways. Women, give up your childish ways, holding those grudges and being silent and holding things against us. That's childish. Men, give up your childish ways, walking out and huffing and puffing and not dealing with it and blowing it under the table or sweeping it under the rug. That's childish. Is it not, church? We don't let our kids get away with it, do we? No, we don't. Why would we let our spouse get away with it? We know that these things are going to happen, conflicts, disappointments, and arguments. We know they're going to be there. And what these things do, they force you to give up your childish ways. I don't recommend you go and creating conflict. I don't recommend you going home and say, you know what, dear, we need some more conflict in our relationship. We're just not loving each other good enough. Would you disappoint me? Would you please? So my love for you can grow. Let's get in an argument so, we can find out what's inside of us. Let's buck heads. Let's pound the glasses together till it all comes out. Then we won't have anything left. And it doesn't work that way. So don't go intentionally looking for it. It's going to happen. You don't have to worry. It's going to happen. And when they do come, we can choose to be childish or we can choose to help it grow your relationship. Wow. It can actually grow your relationship. Conflict is a good thing if dealt with in a healthy way. Let me use this stuff we've been going through in our men's stuff on Tuesday nights. Robert Lewis, I wish I would have thought of this, but some guys are just smarter at things and seeing things. And he came up with this diagram on how to deal with conflict in a healthy way. And what I want you to do we have it? I didn't know. It didn't on my computer. It's not there? Didn't come. Okay, yeah, I had trouble with it. But anyway, everybody responds. We're basically what it says is we respond to conflict the same way every time. You know, we get angry, we get frustrated. Conflict happens, we get angry, we get frustrated. Right? Am I right so far? Yeah. And then we got two choices to make. All right? We can escalate the frustration, or the second choice is we can face the conflict. So we decide to face the conflict. Then we come to another choice. Boy, am I going to let that other person win? Or am I going to totally isolate myself and just say, you know, whatever happens, happens? And if you choose the one, if you isolate yourself, it does no good. Conflict is unhealthy. But if you choose to let the other person win, and you choose to listen, and you choose to open your heart, and the goal is not to see who's right or wrong, but the goal is to come to a resolve. See the difference? When we get in arguments and we get in conflicts, we want to win, right? We want to win because I'm right. Ladies, you're only right 95% of the time. Us guys get 5. All right? But we want to be right because we want to prove to them that we're right, as if it's going to help you love each other better. Just because you're right and they're wrong, and then we start keeping a record of wrongs, don't we? But if you want to deal with it in a healthy way, the goal is not right or wrong. The goal is resolve. What kind of resolution do we need to come to that's fair for both parties? And if you can't come to a resolution, that's when you call me and say, hey, we can't come to a resolution. Or call somebody. I'm free. Other people are $100 an hour. All right? Do you see that, though? Do you see the difference? Because conflict, all those things are going to happen in any kind of relationship. And this works with kids, too. Works with anybody, your friend. The goal is to come to a resolution. And if you want to stay in love, you'll want to come to a resolution. And if you want to stay in love, you give up your childishness. Oh, my stars. You know, you give up your childish behaviors. Those ones that worked with your mom and dad. We just learned this just a few minutes ago. You know, those childish behaviors that worked with your mom and dad, you got to give those up. You knew when to cry at the right time, didn't you, when you were a kid? Oh, I want to ride the pony. Oh, okay, here's a quarter. And we know that works. We know that works, and we got to give up those childish behaviors when you enter into a relationship. And we got to learn to give up our childish actions. You remember playing with your friend, right? And when they did something mean to you, what'd you do? What did you do? A lot of us do a lot. Some of you beat them up, I know. I walked away because I was never big enough to beat them up. But we got to give up those childish actions, those pouting, those temper tantrums. We got to give those up. Those things have to die. And you got to give up those childish emotions. Oh, my stars. Come on, people, let's grow up. Take a moment in your life. Boy, and like I said, emotions rise up in us, and we get angry, and we get caught up in our emotions, and we go back to what we know. We go back to what we learned as a child and as a teen, to what we did as a child and as a teen. Whatever we did then, we run back. Yes, we do. We run back to that moment. Instead of growing up and facing it head on. Instead of, we like to pout and go silent. And we think that's accomplishing something. Well, I'll get them. I won't talk to them for 2 weeks. Just so you know, ladies, guys dream of that. So the worst thing you could do is keep talking. Because they don't know what to do. They got 2 weeks to think about it, you know. You get the point. And we do need to do this, as I said, with the persons that we love the most. Because it's the person we love the most is usually who we hurt the most, is it not? You want to stay in love, give up your childishness. See, all of us in here are longing for the happily ever after. You might not say it, but all of us in here, I am. We want a happily ever after. And the question that video asked, boy, really confronted me. When did you last give someone love like that? Not when did you get loved like that. That's not what this is about. It's not about the other person. It's about you. When did you last give someone love like that? So if you want to stay in love, one needs to give love like that away. Here's the hard part. Even if they don't love you back in that way. That's hard.